All right, well, thanks for joining us again. My name is Tony Carvajal, the Executive Vice President at Florida TaxWatch, and I am joined today by Kurt Wenner, Senior Vice President of Florida TaxWatch. I've loved hearing from you all how much you enjoy these videos, and I absolutely understand why. Kurt really makes sense out of all that's going on, and today we're going to talk about things like the Economic Estimating Conference, the current budget, maybe a little bit about how they compare, but we're going to come back later this week after we do a little bit deeper dive. And before we get into today's conversation, I just really want to emphasize that if you'd like to share this with somebody, just forward the link wherever you got this from. And if you can't find the link, send folks to floridataxwatch.org. That's floridataxwatch.org, and they can see the video from there. But let's jump to what the business of the day is. Kurt, we are closer to the end than the beginning of the session, and just a few weeks left. This last week was pretty significant, not only because the budget came out, but the estimating conference came out. So there were new revenue estimating numbers that just came out. Tell us a little bit about what that means and what the legislature's got to do with those numbers.
Okay, Tony, thank you. Yes, there was a new general revenue estimating conference last week, and they increased the projections of revenue coming into the state by $1.5 billion in the current year and another $550 million next year. So this means that the legislature is going to have $2 billion more for the budget that they're currently putting together than they previously anticipated. You know, that's certainly going to be good news for those budget writers and people whose projects aren't in the budget yet. But really what I found remarkable is that the new fiscal position the state finds itself in is remarkable when it appeared that just over a year ago, we were headed for a major fiscal disaster. The recovery has happened a lot faster. This $2 billion addition, coupled with the $2.1 billion increase that they added back in December to the estimates, that restores almost 3/4 of the $5.4 billion reduction in the first revenue estimating conference of the pandemic back in August of 2020. So the new GR estimate for this year that we're in, that ends June 30th of 21, is going to be about $34 billion. That's 2.6 billion, which is 8.2%. That's pretty healthy growth over 2019's pandemic reduced collections. Collections are supposed to grow another 2.7% next year. And through the forecast horizon of the next 5 years, they're expecting pretty significant healthy growth. And they think that by 2023-24, we'd be fully recovered.
Kurt, I don't think that there's a Floridian who thought that we would be in such a favorable position at this point. And it's not all federal dollars that came into the state. Florida actually has a huge economic engine at work. There's been some really strong leadership decisions. There's been strong actions by Floridians and businesses and taxpayers and individuals that are doing some things. And I think it's fascinating that the budget is where it is. But why don't we actually turn to that question? What is the status on the budget? I know the numbers came out last week. What are we looking at, and what should we be watching for?
Well, yes, the House and Senate both passed their budgets last week. The next step will be the budget conference, where the two chambers have to get together and negotiate. They have to agree on every number and every word in the final appropriations bill. What's pretty different this year is it's uncommon. There's always a revenue estimating conference in session, but it usually takes place fairly early before the House and Senate have released their budgets. Now this comes after the House and Senate have actually passed their budgets. It's giving $2.1 billion more to lawmakers to spend. That's unique. And you know, this new money comes after the chambers have already proposed budgets that are balanced and leave more than $2 billion in cash reserves. So the budget is going to get bigger. Besides the added $2 billion in new revenue, it was also recently announced that it looks like the federal government is going to extend its increased match for Medicaid for a couple months, which is good news because of our increased Medicaid rolls. But that is going to add another probably a couple hundred million that we don't have to spend on Medicaid and we can put elsewhere.
So the budgets have got to match. The numbers have to be precise. How close are they? Are there major differences between the House and the Senate budget?
There are some major differences, but if you listen to the House and Senate leadership, they seem to think that they're closer than a lot of people think, and that they shouldn't have problems. They seem to be on the same page, but there are differences. The first difference to look at is the size of the budget. The House budget totals a little over 97 billion. The Senate is just under 95 billion. So about a $2 billion, a little more than $2 billion difference in the bottom line. And then there's individual differences throughout the budget. One is hospital funding. Both chambers, citing the federal money that hospitals have gotten directly, have reduced hospital funding. The House by about 500 million, the Senate by 300 million. Now the House does propose 240 million in state and federal funding to pay for expanding Medicaid benefits for an additional 10 months to women who have recently given birth. The Senate does not have that, but the Senate president has said that's something he thinks that they're going to be able to come to terms on. There's also a question about unemployment compensation. The Senate has a proposal to increase the monthly benefit by $100 million. The House is not there yet. There's also the new Resilient Florida program, which the governor recommended and both the House and the Senate want to do. This will provide grants to local governments to help mitigate, for projects that mitigate funding and sea level rise. And it's supposed to be based on a real comprehensive review and prioritization process using, they're going to come up with a statewide plan. And so hopefully this won't become a project that's kind of like water projects are now, where it's whatever member can happen to get their project in, and it's going to be based on science and what's most important. Right now, the Senate has 200 million going there. The House has about 140. Both of them, by the way, fund this program at the expense of affordable housing. They're changing how money's distributed into the affordable housing trust funds, so it's going to reduce that. Now, a couple of other things is that the child's endowment, which is where our tobacco settlement money goes, and it's kind of considered reserves by the legislature, although a lot of people don't think it is. It's supposed to be going to help pay for things like Medicaid and tobacco education, non-smoking. But they want to eliminate that fund and just put all the money into the budget stabilization fund, which would make it truly reserves, but those would be reserves that we could only touch in an emergency or a budget deficit, where now the child's fund, the legislature can grab that money whenever they want. But really the biggest thing that's going to have to be determined in the budget conference is what they're going to do with the federal funding. As you know, the American Rescue Plan is going to send about $2 billion to the state, another $7 billion to locals. But we're going to get $10 billion. Neither of the chamber's budget totals include that money. The Senate doesn't address the funding at all in the budget. The House does, in what they call the back of the bill. They list out, contingent on them getting half of the money, what they want to spend it on. They have about $8 billion in that. And the governor has also come out with some things that he thinks the money should be spent on. So they're going to have to determine what they're going to do with it. The House also uses some federal funds to help increase education spending, which the Senate doesn't do yet. But it looks like most of the spending is going to be on, infrastructure type stuff. The biggest thing in the House proposal is $3.5 billion for deferred base maintenance on state buildings and schools. which a lot of people are saying, what does that really have to do with the pandemic? It's something that needs to be done, but $3.5 billion for that when there's, some people think considerable needs. So that's going to be probably the biggest thing to work out. Another thing you have to remember is this does allow states for the first time, as opposed to, say, the CARES Act. The federal government says that states can use part of this money to replace lost revenue from the last fiscal year before the pandemic hit to the next fiscal year. Did you lose any revenue? You can use it to replace it. Florida lost $2 billion in that change, and so there's actually about $2 billion that the state can probably use for anything it wants. It's basically going to be just general revenue. So there's a lot of questions with federal funds and how they're going to do it, but they'll eventually work it out, and hopefully they'll do it before the session ends and they have to extend.
Well, we're recording this about 3 weeks before the end of session, and things are looking good. This is an unusual year, this close, this much money available. I know that you have offered that maybe we'll come back later this week and compare the two budgets and talk about things, but I'll just reflect. This has been one of the most interesting years for those of us who like to watch the budget and watch the legislative process. Not only did we have more money available than we thought we would, but leaders are really trying to redefine things. I mean, over the last few years, we've had trust funds that have not been lock boxes. We've been sweeping dollars, and while they're reducing the Sadowski fund, they're actually giving it more money than in the past. It's just one of those head scratcher opportunities, and the federal dollars are really just making this all interesting. So this won't be our last conversation. People are enjoying these videos, and I'm hoping that they're going to continue to. They could catch up on the past ones, by the way, at floridataxwatch.org, and they can look for the next ones. We'll send it to you all if you are registered for this. If not, you can just go to that website, floridataxwatch.org, and find these videos. So, Kurt, let's wrap this up with just a question about what should we be looking for as we go into the rest of this week in terms of budget, or for that matter, any bills that are in process.
Yeah, we are getting close to the end. And right now, as far as the budget goes, we got to see if any progress is made in preliminary budget talks. The budget conference hasn't officially started, but this is when a lot of the real negotiation goes on, because they're not going to call the conference until they have some of the big issues settled, like what the allocations for each part of the budget is and some of the real leadership priorities. They need to agree on those kinds of things before they can let the subcommittees start taking a crack at, some of the minutia of the budget. So we may see the possible start of the conference this week. They could wait till next week, but then they're going to be having to hurry in order to get it done 72 hours before the end of the session, like the Constitution requires. So we'll keep an eye on how those budget talks are going. It is getting close to the end. A lot of bills are dying on the vines in the House. The Ways and Means Committee and the Rules Committee are meeting all day. Ways and Means on Thursday and Rules on Friday, and they're going to go through probably a huge list of bills that hasn't been agended yet. But if your bill isn't on one of those agendas, it's probably in trouble. Also, out of the Ways and Means, we could see a tax package come out. It's probably not going to be anything major. The big tax legislation having to do with the business rent tax and e-fairness has already been passed, but there could be a package with a lot of smaller kind of changes to tax policy, and we'll probably see that towards the end of this week. Hey, and then I mentioned e-fairness, and hopefully we'll see the governor sign Senate Bill 50 this week. He got the bill today, and he's got a week to sign it when he gets it during the session. And we've talked about this before, but that's a huge bill for Florida Tax Watch. It contains 4 recommendations we've pushed for some time. E-fairness is the collection of remote sales taxes. They're going to use that money to shore up the unemployment compensation trust fund and help avoid a big tax increase on businesses when they can afford it to lease. After that is funded, they're going to reduce the business rent tax, which we've called for years, along with many other people. going to decrease it from 5.5 to 2%. And Florida is the only state in the nation that has this tax, and we find that it is really not good for Florida's business climate and competitiveness. And it also makes a smaller change, but one I think is significant, that we're going to get rid of the bracket system for calculated sales tax and go to a rounding system, which makes sense. But the bracket system basically overcharges people, and tens of millions of dollars, penny here and a penny there, but it starts to add up. So we're hoping to see the governor sign that, and that would be a good thing for the whole state of Florida.
There's been a lot of great news from the COVID liability shield to now this Senate Bill 50, which is the e-fairness and all the extra bonuses that are tied in. Usually we worry about when the legislature's in session. This year we might actually say, hey, it's a good thing. Maybe we should extend it just to see if there's any other gifts left. But I know that we won't, and we're pretty close to the end. Kurt, I know you'll join us later this week to talk about the differences between the budget. We'll be back next week as we continue to talk about where things are going. Let me just remind folks that after session, there's still a lot of work to be done. Not only is it turkey season, and we'll be looking for things that maybe did not follow a good, transparent, and accountable process through the budgeting process, but we're also in our planning stages for next year's research agenda as well as legislative session. The legislature meets earlier next year, beginning in January, which means it won't be too long before they're back in committee meetings. And we are gathering on June 2nd and 3rd in Orlando for our spring meeting to talk about a number of different things, including our policy agenda and our research agenda as we go forward. It will be our board meeting and a review of the activities that have happened this legislative session and what's still left to do. We're also going to be featuring our Principal Leadership Award winners. This is a fantastic program, and I hope you're going to plan on joining us at the Lowe's Royal Pacific in Orlando, June 2nd and 3rd, so that you can celebrate that. And on top of that, there's this wonderful Citizenship Institute that brings together some of the top future leaders in Florida. And I hope that you'll join us to find out a little bit more about that and maybe think about who should be joining us in next year's class. So a lot to catch up on the budget this week. You can follow our legislative agenda at floridataxwatch.org. You can also register for the upcoming spring conference, June 2nd and 3rd in Orlando. And if you want to see Kurt, can't get enough of him, I sure as heck can't, then you can go to floridataxwatch.org and pull up some of the past videos or look for the next ones. Kurt, looking forward to having a conversation with you next week, and I appreciate you making sense of this all.
I enjoy it. Thank you, Tony.
All right, for each of you who makes our work possible here, thank you. For those of you who still want to become part of the winning team at Florida Tax Watch, you can reach out to us directly. By the way, my name is Tony Carvajal. The name's there on the screen, but you can email me at tcarvajal@floridataxwatch.org or just give us a call, 850-222-5052, and we'll connect you to all the issues that matter to you. Thanks for joining us today. Look forward to continuing the conversation next week.